Hey, Lindsay, how are you?
Hello, Aubrey. I'm doing great. How are you? How's everything?
Excellent. Really, I'm doing really well. I have a question. I'm curious about your neighborhood there in Denver. Has it changed a lot since you moved in? Lots of new neighbors or people moving out?
It's a good question. I don't know. It's kind of an urban leaning neighborhood. Like it's kind
Mm.
of busy and a bit of a walking neighborhood. So I'm not really sure, but I do know my next door neighbor is moving out and he's looking to sell his house. So we may have
Oh.
new neighbors here very soon.
Ooh,
Yes.
exciting. Hopefully they'll be good new neighbors. That's always a little scary because you never know. It could be great. It could be
Yeah.
terrible.
It could go either way.
It
It could
could go
go
either
either
way.
way.
Well, I brought that up because we had this really interesting question, and we're going to share some vocabulary today. And one of them is squeeze out, which we often think about people getting sort of pushed out of a neighborhood, either by increased home prices or for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So
Yeah,
it's been
for
interesting
sure.
here too. Just home prices are so high that
Oh.
a lot of people just aren't able to buy in the neighborhood, or they're
Mhm.
getting pushed out, squeezed out, and so hopefully that will change soon, so it's easier to purchase a new home.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot about Arizona in terms of growth,
Yeah.
and, housing prices going up. There are certain key markets in the US that are really surging,
Yes.
and I think Arizona is one of them, the Phoenix area, which is near where
Mhm.
you are, right,
Yep,
Aubrey? Near
exactly.
Phoenix?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, and this is there are probably lots of areas, but Phoenix is definitely one of them, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll get on into that topic probably on another episode for sure. But we're gonna get into this a little bit. This idea of like squeezing out and using out after a verb, right? I love it.
Mhm. Yes,
But
exactly.
yeah, but first let's hit follow on this podcast, guys. All Ears English. You want to have it right in your queue for 2024. Aubrey, January is a good time to start learning, right? To commit to
Absolutely,
a
right?
schedule. Yeah.
If you guys are setting new goals, New Year's resolutions to work on
Mhm.
your English, then make sure and hit follow here on the podcast so that all of the episodes are right there in your queue. Makes it really easy.
I love it. Hit that follow button now, right wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But this question actually came from YouTube, which is another good place to consume the show. Right, Aubrey?
Absolutely. If you're more of a visual learner, you can watch these episodes on YouTube. Hi, I'm
Yeah.
waving if you're watching the video,
Hello.
and leave a comment there. Yeah, with a question. We love that.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions on YouTube, actually, really good ones.
Mhm,
So, should I
mhm.
read this question?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this is from Layla. And she says, "Hey girls, thank you very much for your valuable content. I appreciate and value your efforts to make this content. I've been listening to your podcast for more than a year and I've learned a lot from you." Aubrey, I love when we get these messages, these love letters from our listeners.
I know, me too. So it's one thing to listen to a podcast a few times, but,
Yeah.
like, to stick with it for a year or years,
Oh my
like,
gosh.
that we know you're really loving it, you're learning a ton, that's awesome.
Yeah, share it with a friend, guys. Let a friend know about our show.
Yes.
So Layla says, "Could you please talk about the meaning of bleed out? I've seen this sentence today. There is a fair bit of bleed out these. And I've struggled to understand the meaning of this sentence. Loads of love from Azerbaijan. Have a great day." Wow, Azerbaijan. Oh my gosh, that's
I know,
amazing, Aubrey.
amazing. Yes, and thank you for this question. I know it can be really tricky when you're learning a new language and you see all these different verbs and phrasal verbs and you see these sentences and it doesn't make sense at all. And often you don't
Yes.
really have anywhere to look because if you Google this, like I don't know what you would find. There wouldn't be much. This is a little tricky. I think maybe the sentence that she saw was there is a fair bit to bleed out of this because that would
Maybe.
make sense to me, right?
Okay.
Not a
Okay.
super common phrasal verb, but I do hear it used this way. So we're going to talk about bleed out a little bit and then some related phrasal verbs, wring out and squeeze out, that we use a little more often. These are all really interesting.
Yeah, it's all about context, guys. So we're going to show
Yeah.
you, how to use these phrasal verbs, and I think we're talking about phrasal verbs a lot this month, right? I love that.
I know.
Just this concept of when do we use them? What do they mean? Okay, Aubrey. So should we go through our first one then? The bleed out phrasal
Yes.
verb.
So, two things here. Like, first, bleed out, you're going to hear most often meaning death from blood loss. If someone bleeds
Yes.
out, that means they were injured, they lost too much blood, and they passed
Right.
away.
Right.
And the other way you'll hear bleed, not bleed out, but we talk about colors in clothing, bleeding. I just
Oh,
realized that sentence might have had to do with that. If it was like there's a fair bit bleeding out of these and you're talking about clothing, that means the dye, the color is bleeding out. So it could be about
interesting.
that too.
Okay, yeah, so there's a lot of context here, right? I mean, I know,
Right.
Aubrey, you're into true crime, right? So
Yes.
you probably end up hearing a lot of the concept of bleed out, like if someone, as you said, death from blood loss, there's been some kind of a murder, there's lots of famous podcasts that are true crime
Yes.
podcasts.
Or
They're
if you watch
huge
some of these
genres.
hospital shows like Grey's
Right.
Anatomy, some of
Yes.
these, then you're gonna hear a doctor yelling like, "He's bleeding out."
Right,
Means
right. You're
they're
gonna
losing too much blood.
Yeah, I feel like that's the most common way that would be used, I think, right?
Mhm.
But I like your idea of my clothes bled or bled out, I guess. We could also say they've just bled into each other, right?
Yes,
Sort of
right,
that
and if you're
idea.
talking about,
The
color
dye.
bleeding
Mhm.
out, yeah,
Mhm.
because this happened to me once. I bought these black jeans and I washed them
Mm.
with, like, other clothing, and the dye bled out, into
Yeah.
all the other fabric, and everything ended up really dingy and gray and awful. I was like, "Whoops, I should have washed those alone."
Oh, we've all had our laundry mishaps. I just
Yes.
last week, I was visiting my parents in Boston, and I put my mom's, like, gorgeous wool beautiful wool sweater in the dryer, and it shrunk to, like, the
Oh,
size of a
no.
two-year-old sweater. I'm like,
Oh, no.
"Sorry, mom."
I've done that to my kids. My daughter, my teenager, bought a new sweater, and I just washed it and dried it, and it ended up, like you said, like doll clothing.
Like, "Okay, well, let's go to a kid
Whoops.
secondhand store then." Uh,
Yeah, right?
so these things happen, but yeah, you gotta watch out for the especially in jeans, dye. Yeah, they use dye in the jeans sometimes, so
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
but the second meaning of bleed out, it is about extracting information, right? We have many
okay.
ways that we talk about squeezing information out of something or fun, squeezing fun out of something, and this
Oh,
is a really great way to connect, right? Asking others about how they squeeze enjoyment out of life because we have to do a lot of stuff in our lives that isn't that fun. Might be
right.
a little routine, a little boring. So how do we squeeze the fun out of life?
Oh my gosh. What do you do, Aubrey, to squeeze the fun out of life? What do you do? What's your go-to, like, method? Anything specific?
Some
Any
sports for
strategies that you
sure,
have?
right? Pickleball, volleyball, like,
Yeah, you're pretty
it's so
active.
fun for me, so I
Mhm.
squeeze some fun out of life by being active, but not just anything, not just running or walking, right? Sports that
Yeah.
team sports that are really fun for me.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. For me, it's being outside, just
Mhm.
I just feel happier when I'm outdoors. I don't know what it is, just breathing in the air, the sunshine on my face. It's just that's my go-to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So let's dive in here just with this meaning of extracting information because this sentence that our listener heard could have been about this, right? If it
Okay.
was there is a fair bit to bleed out of this, I can imagine being at work and we're
Interesting.
talking about something where we need to pull information out of something. It might be said that way. Okay, there's a fair
Okay.
bit to bleed out of this, meaning
Hmm.
there's a lot of information to get out of this, but I don't hear that often. Do you, Lindsay?
No, this is not a common use for me. So
Mm-mm.
I don't yeah. I mean, for example, let's bleed what we can out of this information. I guess it makes sense.
Mhm.
I don't think it's in my repertoire, you
Right, it's
know?
not common. I when I'm, like, reading this question and trying to think, what did they actually hear and what could that have
Yeah.
meant? Because even me, I hear that and I'm like, I'm not sure because we don't hear this expression very often, but it could have meant
Mhm.
this. I could imagine someone saying, "I need to bleed a lot of information out of this, whatever it is that's happening, this meeting, this presentation," right? But I think there are a
Mm.
couple of ways that we would say this much more commonly.
Right, I think on another episode we could do on business English, we could talk about extracting information. I could talk about the word glean. What have you
Mm.
gleaned from this? Sometimes I find that verb annoying, but we use it all the time in academia, right? Glean
For
insights
sure.
all the time everywhere. There's a lot of other things we could say there. So
That's a
maybe
good
we'll
idea.
do that another day. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to say that, and we use them all a ton at work. So, yeah, be sure to hit
Yes.
follow over on Business English so that you don't miss that episode.
I love it. Okay, so where to next? Wring out. What do we
Yeah,
think
so
about
this
this
I
one?
do hear more often. Same meaning, to extract
Mhm.
information from someone or out of something, or to obtain something from somebody with difficulty, especially by
Hmm,
putting pressure on them, right? So let's
interesting.
give a couple example sentences. This I would definitely use over bleed out for getting
Oh, yeah.
information out of someone.
Yeah, so here's a sample sentence. We need to wring some information out of her. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so do you
Yeah.
hear it this way, Lindsay? I use this a lot and I hear this a lot.
Huh. I don't hear it as much, but I get it. It makes sense. When I think about wring out, I just go to the sponge, the basic
Mhm.
physical idea of taking a sponge and wringing the water out of the sponge.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's the most common, right? We
Yeah.
wring water out of something that's wet by squeezing it and
Yes.
the water comes out. This is sort of a more of an idiomatic use to
Yeah,
talk
which we
about
love.
doing the same thing instead of with a sponge with like a person to
Yeah.
wring information out of someone or it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a meeting or a document, right? I'm going to wring everything I can out of this.
Or for example, we can wring a lot out of this data, meaning we can kind of gather or get a lot of information out of this data that we've collected, right?
Exactly, right? We're going to read into all of this data and then use that to inform what we're going to do. And we would say that I'm going to wring a lot out of this information.
Yeah. What's a past tense of this word? Wring.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. It's wrung, so it's irregular, right?
Yeah.
WRUNG, wrung
Hmm.
out. And we
Yeah.
also use this idiomatically. If someone says, I feel really wrung out, what would that mean, Lindsay?
Oh, I feel emotionally exhausted. Yes, this can definitely
Exactly.
happen for
And you can
sure.
imagine that visual if you are that sponge that's been wrung out, like,
Yes.
that isn't a good feeling for a person, right?
Right.
Imagine if someone's asking you a ton of questions, you'd be like, "Wow, I feel really wrung out after all of those questions."
Oh, the first thing that comes to mind is our IELTS students, right? Over
Oh,
on our
for
IELTS
sure.
Energy podcast. I wonder how they feel, after that Saturday afternoon speaking exam and then the writing test. Oh,
Absolutely. I feel like anyone after a long exam is going to feel wrung out because
yeah.
you're using your brain, there's all this stress and anxiety, or there can be leading up to it. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, you just get sort of emotionally exhausted. This is a great way to say that. Oh, I feel really wrung out.
Yeah, it could happen after conferences too. So, but by the way, guys, if you don't know, we have this whole other podcast called IELTS Energy. And Aubrey, you're over there with Jessica 2 days a week. So our listeners should go check that one out too if IELTS is anywhere in their future. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's really fun. Jessica and I keep
Yeah.
it fun so that, yes, it's test prep, yes, you're
Yes.
learning vocabulary strategies, but in a really fun way. Believe it or not, you
Yeah.
gotta check it out.
Check it out. All right. We're getting to the last one today, which is squeeze out. Tell us about this one. Squeeze
Yeah,
out.
so very similar. You could say you squeeze out a sponge or a rag, so similar to wring out, and then we'll also use it to mean force out, often to force someone out of a space or an activity. But we also talk about squeezing good, fun out of something. Like, here's an example. Let's squeeze what we can out of our time here before we move, right?
Yes.
Before someone's only going to be somewhere a couple more weeks, they want to go do all the fun things and be like, let's squeeze every drop of fun we can out of this 2 weeks.
Yeah, if we want to go to the literal definition, which is sometimes helpful, think about squeezing the juice out of a lemon, right? You take
Mm,
a lemon, do you have a lemon squeezer in your
yes.
in your kitchen, right? You put the thing on the plastic and then just get that juice as much as you can. Love that.
Yes, we have a lot of citrus here in Arizona, so I'll end up with,
Oh,
like,
do you?
big bags of lemons because they
Really?
grow here. So I have 2
Ooh.
different squeeze. One of them is, like a metal squeezer, and then another I have an electric one that has the plastic, but, like, it
Wow,
spins it, so
fancy.
then it comes out so I can make lemonade, and
Oh my
yeah, we
gosh.
have the the electric no nonsense squeezers here.
Yeah, no messing around over there in your kitchen. I like
Juicers.
it.
Yeah.
All right, should we do a role play to show our listeners how this all comes together?
Yeah, let's do it. So in this role play, we are chatting about changes to our neighborhood,
And this is a relevant topic right now, right?
for
Super
sure.
relevant. Yeah, here we go.
I'll start us out. So many people are moving. I feel like this neighborhood is bleeding people.
Oh yeah, I just found out my neighbors are moving. I'm not sure why though.
We need to wring it out of them. Is it possible they're being squeezed out so that shopping mall can be built on the corner?
Well, maybe. I hope they can squeeze out some fun before they have to leave. We should plan something. Nice. Little
Nice.
block
So
party. You guys do block
yeah,
parties
right.
around
We did.
your
We just did one on Halloween that was really fun, like a
Oh.
chili cook-off, and everybody came out to chat. It was great.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah, we don't do that here in my neighborhood, but I was just, visiting my aunt's place in California, and they had a little Halloween block party, and I remembered
Fun.
what's nice about the suburbs is nice, right? Like, you know your
Yes.
neighbors, you can enjoy festivities with the families and that kind of thing. It's kinda nice.
Absolutely. Definitely
Yeah.
perks, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, some downsides not being right in the city center,
Yeah.
but definitely some
Yeah.
good things too.
Oh, for sure. So here, Aubrey, you said so many people are moving. I feel like this neighborhood is bleeding people, right?
Yeah, and this is that use that's not quite as common. So not bleeding out, but we would say a place is bleeding people if so many people are moving. It's just another way of saying
Yeah,
losing
that's
a
kind
lot
of
of people.
it's a little idiomatic. It's a creative
Mhm.
use of that concept of bleeding, right? Like
Exactly.
you mentioned quickly in the episode about bleeding money, companies bleed money. That's commonly used and it's being used here in the same way that we're losing people
Exactly.
quickly. Yes.
Yes, like, besides, bleeding actual blood, we do use it idiomatically to say that someone's losing either money or people. We'll say it's bleeding funds or bleeding
Yes.
people. Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. What else? What did you say, Aubrey?
And then I said, "We need to wring it out of them." This is something I would totally say if you're like, "Ooh, I
Huh.
don't know. I don't know what they're" then I'll be like, "Oh, I need to wring it out of them," meaning, like, I need to extract that information. I need to get them to tell me.
So it means you're gonna be creative in the way you ask, right? You're gonna come at them in different ways. You're gonna not let down, not back
It
off.
definitely implies, because there's a reason I'm not just saying, "Ooh, we need to ask them." It sort of implies you've already asked, and for some
Yeah,
reason they didn't tell you, and
right.
now I have to yeah, like you said, be
Go back.
creative, ask another
Yeah,
way, try and get
yeah.
them to tell me.
Oh, interesting. And then you said, is it possible they're being squeezed out so the shopping mall can be built on the corner?
Yeah, so
Hmm.
this is one use of that squeezed out to, like, force someone out. We'll talk
Mhm.
about that because often, like, where I live, there was a lot of farmland, and
Ah,
they squeezed out all the farmers, and I'm sure they did that by offering them quite a bit of money for their land, but they're
right.
squeezing them out nevertheless, right? They're trying to make room for all of the development that's happening.
Yeah, it makes me think of, when all the highways were built after World War II in the US. I know the government just came I mean, they have the eminent domain concept, right? Where the
Mm,
government can just kinda come in and say, "We're building a highway." Your example about the shopping mall is a little bit different. It's probably a private project, right?
right.
But there are situations where the government can come in. That happened to my grandfather. He owned a butcher
Mm.
shop in, Darien, Connecticut, and the government just came in and said, "We're building I-95 right through this street," and that's it. That's happening. So, it
Yeah,
happens in
and they
different
might
ways.
offer to, buy their property, but often lower than it's worth, and you just
Sure,
don't have a
yeah.
choice, like, "Okay."
Yeah, for sure. Squeezed out. Okay, and then I said, "Maybe, I hope they can squeeze out," so we used it again, squeeze out, just in a little bit
Mhm.
of a different way. I
Yeah,
hope
you're
they
saying, "I
can
hope they can
squeeze out some
squeeze
fun.
out some fun," right? This is a
Yes.
much more positive use, meaning, like,
For sure.
take advantage of the time they
Yeah.
have by making it fun, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's good to be able to talk about things. I do think that for our listeners, guys, the useful conversation topic here is about gentrification, right? Because people
Yeah,
are talking about this, about development and people moving and things changing, like what neighborhoods and cities are in style right now, what's out of style. Super interesting from an economic level. So, guys, dive into
exactly.
these concepts, right, Aubrey? Don't you
Yeah,
think?
that's a great conversation starter, and everyone's going to have something to say about their own neighborhood, or they might be curious about yours. This is a great thing to you might not always think to ask someone about what their neighborhood's like, if it's changed a lot lately, if people are moving or moving in,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to chat about.
Yeah, I think this could make a great poll question for today, Aubrey. So maybe we will put up a little poll question for our listeners. So, guys, if you're listening in Spotify, you can vote in our polls. So check it out
Yes.
right after you finish today's episode. And any final thoughts? I mean, that's it. This is a conversation starter right here.
Absolutely, right? So thank you for this question. It's interesting. Vocabulary can be confusing when you hear it in sentences that don't seem to make sense
Right.
but often it can lead to really interesting conversations.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, Aubrey. And good conversation leads to connection. And that is why we are here.
Absolutely.
All right. You have a good day. I'll talk to you soon, Aubrey. Take care.
You too. Thanks, Lindsay. Bye.
Bye.